You wanna hear a crazy stat? I've been making videos for 13 years. I've been making League videos for 12 years. And this is my number 1000. Alright, enough for the break, back to the grind. Whenever I get to talk about the Riot MMO, I have to be wary of the fact that the people who like these videos the most do not come from League of Legends. In fact, believe it or not, but most of that audience comes from World of Warcraft. Not only is this apparent by the amount of WoW creators reacting to my videos, which I'm totally fine with, but also, here is a more statistical proof. And so, for all of you who came here from outside the normal sphere, if we wanna talk about what happened to Riot's MMO, we have to talk about the big news that arrived from League's narrative team. It all started last week with a new drop from League's dev team, where outside of the normal news drops and new champion teasers, after a very long time, we got an update on what is happening to League's lore. For all of you who are unaware, for the last year and a half, the lore of League of Legends got essentially frozen, with the last story that would expand the League of Legends universe, which is not connected to a new champion release, being released in June 2022. After which, without any announcements, League's lore just stopped getting updated. And from that point on, the only development on this universe we got were new cards from Legends of Runeterra, as well as 2 new games from Riot Forge, which still sounds good enough, but for context, on top of that, in the past, we used to get about 20 or 30 short stories per year. So naturally, over time, the lore community went through the 7 stages of grief, starting with frustration and ending with acceptance. And eventually, after that very long time, we finally got an update. It was an update that on paper didn't seem that big, but in fact it is so significant that I turned those 2 minutes of news into a 30-minute long video. Among these short news, we learned that Riot is dropping short stories. Because truth be told, people are too lazy to read and almost nobody engaged with them. Which, even though my job used to rely on those, I have to agree with it. These days, if a story is not narrated, people won't care. I mean, look at today's youth, they won't stand a narrated video if it is over 10 seconds long. So instead, Riot will focus their stories onto the bigger projects, be it bigger cinematics or gameplay events. But this is also connected to another big piece of information, the one that from now on, everything that comes out from League's IP will be canon in one unified universe. Because for those of you who don't know, that is not how the lore used to function. League of Legends used to be a bit more like a multiverse. Now, I have never seen the Avengers in my life, but from what I've been told, it functions a little bit like the MCU. The core Canon Universe is the one that was connected to League of Legends, and all its lore came from a website called Universe, which is where you can also find the interactive map. But from this core universe, you had other versions that would branch out. For example, Arcane was never canon in the core universe. In fact, the differences in the stories between Arcane and League of Legends are quite big, which is why the video where I explained those differences was so popular. But on the other side, we also had Legends of Runeterra, a card game rooted in League's universe, which also brought up things which were never mentioned in the core universe. And so, Legends of Runeterra was also considered a different version of the core universe. But now, with the news we were given, it was confirmed that all of these are being united, so that everything can be canon. Now, of course, this would mean that some parts of some of the universes have to be retconned, because only one true version of the story has to make it through. Which is why, in some parts, there is a little bit of a confusion in the community. But in fact, it was confirmed that Arcane is now fully canon, with Legends of Runeterra being second in priority. because it was confirmed that the vast majority of that game is already in line with the new universe. which means that these two together will overwrite everything else that came from the core universe. Now, I understand that all of this sounds a bit complex, but there is a very good reason why Riot is doing this. On one side, it is a bit of a reaction to feedback, because no matter where you went, people either didn't know about the multiverses and they thought that Arcane was fully canon, or they knew about the different versions of the story, but because Arcane was so good, they wanted it to be canon. So with this merging, you're gonna be satisfying most of your audience. Which, by the way, now also means that by watching Arcane, you're just teasing yourself for the MMO. But the other reason why this happened, and arguably the more important one, is that this is a setup for Riot's future games. Right now, besides Riot Forge, there are 3 big games related to Runeterra which Riot is working on. The fighting game nicknamed Project L, a kind of a forgotten top-down fighter called Project F, which we still have no information on besides that very short clip, and of course, the long-awaited MMO. But the amazing thing about these games is that now, with the news that arrived, we now know that all of these will be connected. The places we'll see will exist across all the games. The characters will be consistent no matter where they appear. And their story and motivations should be linked in some way. Of course, that is unless it gets overwritten with gameplay. Now, I know that all of this may sound insane, and perhaps a little bit far-fetched because it may not seem like a big deal. But that is where Riot disagrees. Because a very important detail is that Riot announced that they now have what they call League's IP team, with their job being to oversee everything that comes out of League's IP and make sure that all the stories that come out are consistent in that one singular universe. Or again, in other words, there is a whole team that is dedicated to make sure everything is canon and everything is consistent.
So going forward, from today, all new storytelling is going to be part of one shared canon, rather than a jumble of different experiences that are similar but inconsistent. And our goal is to ensure that major events in our stories, as well as the essence of what makes a champion who they are, will be reflected across everything that Riot makes.
Which, as it turns out, should be a big deal for Riot's MMO. So let me explain how it's related to that. You see, in the past, when I was working on the Riot MMO videos, we always talked about everything as a hypothetical. We knew what existed in the universe. And so we were able to pick out all the things Riot might put into their game. Did you catch it? No matter what we talked about, be it the base world, the races and classes, the bosses and villains, the loot, or even the mounts, they were always things Riot might put into their game. Because we always assumed that the MMO will be a twist on their universe. But now we know there will be no twists. Not with the IP team overlooking it. Now, what's even better is that if you go back to those videos, you'll see that for the majority of the examples, I showed you things from Legends of Runeterra, which was confirmed to be one of the foundations of the new universe. Which means that all those videos became way less hypothetical and way more like a guideline for what is Riot trying to recreate. Or in other words, somehow those videos became a lot more relevant. Which is funny because one of the big critiques I got for those videos was that they were awful because Riot's MMO was just one big mystery and I was making stuff up. So was I now? To put this into context for WoW's audience, if we go back to 2002... Oh god, we are old. Back to when Warcraft 3 was released. If you look at all the world building that came with it, you'll see that since then things changed. Especially if you look at the world map. The Warcraft 3 map was vastly different from what made it into WoW. In a way, people considered the WoW version an upgrade and an evolution over what came before. But when you break it down, it also became an alternative take on the world. One that made more sense story-wise and gameplay-wise. Because the map was reconstructed so that leveling and traveling around made more sense. But at the end of the day, there was still a lot of canon story that happened on the old layout. And well, for the longest time, this is how we thought Riot's MMO would work. When it comes out, there would be some changes to the story and the world, so that the MMO wouldn't run into gameplay issues. Which means it wouldn't really be a one-to-one recreation of what we had. Exactly like what happened between Warcraft 3 and WoW. But now we know that Riot is planning ahead of time. And they are setting up their new universe so that there would have to be only a minimum of changes. And so that they can try and go for a one-to-one recreation. Now, is it realistic that Riot will succeed at this? Somewhat. If Arcane told us anything, it is that Riot can really pay attention to the tiniest details. But for the sake of good gameplay, I'm not gonna nitpick some of the changes. So now, with all of this said, Legends of Runeterra kinda became a blueprint for the Riot MMO. Think of it like an archive of concept art that Riot will try to put into their MMO. Sure, I think everyone can agree that Legends of Runeterra has a lot going on, so not everything will be part of the MMO. At least at launch. Because during my interview with the MMO team, they said that their ultimate goal is to recreate the Runeterra that we know. Funnily enough, they probably said it while knowing that Riot will be changing how the universe works. So they probably knew those words would have some weight. Even though back then, I definitely didn't. Which also means that everything I showed you in my videos might as well be real. Which kinda came as a surprise to me as well, to be honest. When you have a look at the mounts, the question is no longer, will they put this dog into their game? The question now shifted to, how will this dog appear in their game? Because now we know that dog is somewhere in that world. When it comes to all the big bosses and villains, the question is no longer, who will they pick to be in the MMO? And it's gonna be more about, how will we meet Viego, the greatest villain in this universe? That's unless you count Mordekaiser. Not to mention that when I was hypothetically talking about all the loot and all the legendary weapons that exist in this universe, well, now they should consistently exist in that universe. Which suddenly gives the entire arsenal from the Ruined King a whole new meaning. So I would recommend playing a class that can use two-handed maces, because when we fight Mordekaiser, he better drop Nightfall. And lastly, with perhaps the coolest connection to these news, we have to mention the locations. If the IP team is making sure that everything is consistent, with a pretty high confidence I can tell you that we are extremely likely to find some of the iconic places we know about in the MMO. But what's even cooler is that Arcane is on the same list too. So I can't wait to explore something like the Last Drop. Because no matter how or when that place will be implemented, now we simply know that place will be there. So, to finish off this video, I just wanted to tell you that all the Riot MMO videos which I made, which people thought were totally random, suddenly got a lot more real. Just keep in mind that I am actually not confirming anything. I mean, now we know that all the things that appear everywhere will be in that world somewhere. But that doesn't mean everything will really be there. Because at that point, the scope of the entire MMO would be unrealistic. Think of it like, we knew that Arthas was somewhere in Warcraft 3, so he was in the world, which meant that someday he would come to WoW. That is how we should treat all the information. It's basically, everything is on the table right now. But more on that, since now we learned that everything around League of Legends is connected. In a way, literally everything that comes out will reveal a piece of the MMO. Meaning that even though, for example, Legends of Runeterra is not really making money for Riot, because it is so ridiculously free-to-play friendly, that entire game suddenly got a whole new meaning for Riot. Because even though it may not be a profit-driven game, it is a game that is driving the universe forward. Meaning that it is still giving value to everything else Riot is working on. But also, more importantly, even the cinematics will show us what's going to be in the MMO. Because yes, it was confirmed that some of the previous cinematics are canon in the new universe, which most likely means that Awaken and The Call are canon, and even all the future cinematics, including the one that will feature Aatrox, will be canon too. Which also means that the new cinematic that's coming at the beginning of 2024, featuring the Godslayer, will generate some hype for the MMO. Because again, in a way, all of these parts are consistent across that one universe. So it technically all serves as the MMO marketing. This is by far the best benefit of this new universe. Literally everything that comes out of the singular League IP will serve as hype to promote everything else that is also part of the IP. So we may not be getting any news from Riot's MMO, but in a way, we are. This also means that this guy stays fully canon now. So we may find him in the MMO one day. But of course, since the hype for Riot's MMO reignited yet again with all these news, why don't we cash in on it a little bit? And so, knowing that all the things I showed you before became a lot more real now, here's a little bit of a hype piece to tease what this universe can give us.